Alia Atreides is one of the most fascinating characters in the Dune series. Yes, there is Paul, Leto II, and Jessica, and all the wackiness that goes down with them, but Alia's story is truly a whirlwind. A figure enshrined in the cosmic saga of the Dune universe, she led a life that transcended the boundaries of ordinary existence. Born with the weight of ancestral memories, her story weaves a complex tapestry of triumphs, tragedies, and an irrevocable spiral into darkness. I want to preface this by saying I'm making this after reading only the first 4 books of the series, and nothing more, and having seen the 2021 Dune movie a couple of weeks ago. Additionally, these opinions and interpretations may not be entirely accurate. This is just how I saw the book, so I apologize in advance for any mistakes. Thanks, and enjoy the video. In the second part of Dune, the Fremen need a new Reverend Mother. Theirs is about to die, the Reverend Mother Ramallo, and from what I understand, the Lady Jessica is fed a poisonous drug, and uses her Bene Gesserit ways to change the chemistry of the poison into water. This drug allows the old Reverend Mother to give Jessica her memories, and while doing so, Ramallo is horrified to learn Jessica is pregnant. It says, the experiences poured in on Jessica, birth, life, death, important matters and unimportant, an outpouring of a single view time. As the Reverend Mother dies, the memories of her life and the thousands of lives of the Reverend Mothers before her are transferred into the consciousness of Jessica, and therefore the unborn fetus that would become Alia. Alia is a preborn, privy to the lives and knowledge of thousands of years' worth of experiences before her physical body has even been formed, not just of the Reverend Mothers, but also of her own ancestors, Jessica, Duke Leto, and the Baron. Her first moments of consciousness are those once dominated with other egos and identities before having the freedom to form her own. Trying to imagine that sort of I am, therefore I exist moment that I'm sure we've all had before, while grappling with that much information is incredibly hard, and immediately I was intrigued. Who was this person going to become? In Book 3 of Dune, 2 years have passed, and this is where the person that Alia is truly introduced to us readers. Alia is in the Southern Siege with her mother Jessica and her nephew Leto II. Chani mentions to Paul that the Fremen are hesitant to accept Alia. She's a 2-year-old with the knowledge of an adult. Well, more than one adult, but to the Fremen that's the basic idea. Alia is seen as unnatural, a witch to some. The first time Alia appears is in the Siege, talking with her mother and Hera, who basically raises Alia as Jessica is busy with the tasks of being a Reverend Mother. Alia got into trouble disrupting the birth of a child. Alia has the control of a Bene Gesserit and the knowledge of a Reverend Mother, but the limitations of a toddler's body. I also found the relationship between Hera and Alia very cute. They obviously love each other like mother and daughter or sisters would. Basically like family, which they are since Hera is technically Paul's wife. Hera agrees to convince others in the tribe to be more accepting of Alia. Alia then leaves with a man called Tharthar when the 3 learn of pressure from many Fremen who feel Paul should challenge the leadership of Stilgar in a duel. After a bunch of stuff happens, Paul gets a message that the Southern Siege was raided. Alia was taken captive while his son Leto II was killed. And then we have one of my favorite chapters in the book. The meeting between the Baron, the Reverend Mother Gaius, the Emperor, Princess Irulan, and of course the captive Alia. In this, Gaius realizes that Alia is an abomination, the sisterhood's name for the preborn, and exclaims that Alia must be destroyed. As the meeting comes to an end, the Emperor commands Alia to be thrown into the Coriolis storm. Faking fear, Alia backs into the Baron, who grabs her, and Alia does the most badass thing that solidified her as one of my favorite characters in Dune. She says, "Sorry, grandfather, you have met the Atreides Gom Jabbar," and stabs him in the hand with the poisonous needle, killing him. Imagining this 2-year-old girl just taking down the Baron Harkonnen, this behemoth of a man who is just so evil, with none other than the Gom Jabbar, a needle used to test if someone has the self-control to be called human, is just the coolest thing ever. In Dune Messiah, the character Alia is 14, as 12 years have passed. She's seen as this deity on the same level as reverence as Paul. Pilgrims flock to her temple to witness her, hear what she has to say, and ultimately worship her. By this point in the story, if for whatever reason you haven't read the books, the Atreides, thanks mostly to Paul, have a ton of power as they control Arrakis and therefore the spice. They also kind of use religion and religious beliefs to manipulate their subjects, and there was also a jihad, which is basically a mass genocide done in the name of Muad'Dib by the Fremen all across the known universe. It's very unsettling to read, and I could get into my feelings on it a bit more, but basically the reason why you liked Paul and the Fremen in the first book was because he was this underdog taking down the big guys who exploited and killed innocent people. And now Paul is basically doing just that, so it's much harder in this book to like Paul and subsequently Alia. But Alia, as far as I'm concerned, didn't have much power or say in these events, so whatever. Alia is quite the smartass in this book. She's not afraid to challenge Paul, to speak her mind in meetings or councils and the likes, and I think Paul appreciates that as much as it can confuse him. She's honest with Paul, and in return, Paul constantly asks her for advice and trusts her decisions. While she's not the face of the Empire, she's just as influential to the goings-ons in a lot of ways. Alia and Paul also complement each other. While Paul has prescience and this ability to see into the future, Alia can see for thousands of generations into the past, so together they have a ton of knowledge that makes them even more powerful. There are blind spots, of course, but it takes a real genius to outmaneuver the Atreides. A big plot point in this book involving Alia is the resurrection of Duncan Idaho as a Ghoula via the Tleilaxu. Idaho is gifted to Paul by Edric, and it's very obvious to both Paul and Alia that there is some underlying motive with this move. But for the sake of Alia, she forms a subtle crush on Duncan as the book progresses, which is a bit weird as Duncan is much older than Alia physically, but I think it helps to remember the elderly wisdom that Alia has, and how mentally she is much, much older than Duncan. Also in Chapter 8, Alia's fighting abilities are really impressive. She plays with this target practice thing and is able to reach a score of like 11, which is higher than I think anyone has ever gotten. In Chapter 10, Alia is sent by Paul to do some good old detective work. Alia and Hayat, which is what Duncan is called at this point in the story, as being a Ghoula while being the physical clone of the person they resemble, has no memories of that person, so Hayat isn't really Duncan yet. They're observing the remains of this woman in the desert, and Alia is frustrated because she can't figure out what's happened, which shows a chink in her mental armor. As they fly back, Alia and Duncan fly by the place where Duke Leto, Alia's father, was killed. Duncan hopes this will help him remember his past self. Alia calls him Duncan instead of Hayat and affirms his identity as Duncan. And this, along with the death of Duke Leto, makes Duncan cry. Then Alia challenges Duncan's role as a gift from the Tleilaxu, and Duncan is honest. He believes he was gifted with the express purpose to destroy Paul. Unlike Paul, who tends to appreciate Duncan's honesty, Alia seems frustrated or a bit uncomfortable to me. It doesn't help that Duncan accuses Alia of being careless with her powers, and continues to critique Paul. I think Alia is afraid of the truth here. Duncan is being completely honest, and as a mentat logical, and her Bene Gesserit training tells her this. She can't deny Duncan's opinions because they are true, and she's disturbed by it. At the end of this confusing conversation, Duncan kisses Alia, and says she wanted it, and weirdly she reflects she did. The main plot point of this book doesn't have much to do with Alia, but Alia does observe, and doesn't seem to understand or agree with Paul's decisions throughout. And perhaps she's also a bit confused as to why he's doing what he's doing. Of course, she voices these opinions, whether explicitly or implicitly, and interestingly, Paul seems to inwardly agree. It becomes clear that Paul is in a position where all possibilities he can predict suck, and he just has to choose the lesser of the many evils, and Alia, ignorant to Paul's future seeing, is rightfully seeing the negative outcome. After a bunch of stuff goes down that does not involve Alia, Alia has to help oversee the trial of a Fremen named Korba, who was part of a conspiracy to kill Paul. She is able to pick up on the Fremen in the audience, who seem to relate to Korba, She is also frustrated by Stilgar and Paul as they remain in line with Fremen tradition and do not sentence Corbo without his accuser, but comes to understand their decision. Here, once again, it is shown that Alia is deeply involved in the political drama that surrounds the family Atreides. She's not just some saint, but a knowledgeable Reverend Mother, with few loyalties but to her brother. One of my favorite chapters with Alia is 21. Here, Alia seems to break. Curious beyond control about the future, Alia overdoses on melange, in hope of having visions of the future, like her brother Paul. In a way, Alia succeeds. Duncan talks with her in her high state, and she realizes the future she sees is one in which the Bene Gesserit breed her with Paul as to preserve their genes. This obviously disturbs her. In this state, Alia has what to me is this breakdown. She becomes indisputably vulnerable with Duncan as she criticizes her own existence and laments as to why she has to be the way she is, how all she ever wanted was to be loved, not be a part of history. I think perhaps realizing that the father of the child she had dreamed of wasn't that of a lover but of her brother was this straw that broke her, as she realized she had little control over her free will, that even when she had hopes of a future full of love, it is shattered by this harsh reality that she is no ordinary person, but Alia and Atreides. While that future melts into the tangles of time, Alia becomes aware of the future that Paul is actually creating, and she senses the danger in it. I really like this chapter because Alia actually opens up in it. Yes, she's high on spice, but her breakdown makes her so much more relatable and human, even in the universe that touts she isn't. At the climax of the book, Chani gives birth to twins and dies in the process. Broken with guilt and sadness, Paul tells Alia to negotiate with Skytail, who is a Tlaxu face dancer, who is offering to revive Chani. At this point in the book, it's been proven through Duncan that the memories of Agula can be restored, so in theory, Chani can be brought back. Alia is tempted, but Paul kills Skytail before she agrees to a deal. Paul realizes that his newly born children are also preborn, just like Alia, which he did not anticipate. Additionally, his future vision powers are gone. In one last gesture as a true Fremen, Paul walks into the desert and leaves Alia to oversee the Empire until his children are old enough to take over. This takes the story into the third book, Children of Dune, and while it's named for the twins Ghanima and Leto that Paul and Chani create, the story is also heavily about Alia. For the most part, Dune Messiah leaves me with this positive impression of Alia. She's burdened from a young age, but deals with it amazingly well. She is confident, intelligent, and at the same time emotional and vulnerable. Heck, she almost gives up the entire Atreides stock in Chom, and therefore financial power, to save the life of Chani, her sister-in-law and friend. During this book, I was equally excited to meet Paul and Chani's children, and to see the Empire under the control of Alia. But honestly, I was shocked by the events of this book, wildly more than those of Dune Messiah. The book opens with the arrival of Lady Jessica back on Arrakis. It's been about 9 years since Dune Messiah, so Alia's roughly 23 years old. She's married to Duncan, Idaho, and is stressed about the arrival of her mother after so many years of residence on Caladan. The main reason seems to be that Jessica has reformed her bond with the Bene Gesserit and fully sees Alia as the abomination the Reverend Mothers see her as. Moreover, Alia has endured a major change since the last time she saw her mother, which I'll get into later. Alia talks to Ghani and Leto about this event, and it's pretty obvious they don't have much respect for her. She has very little control over them, and this makes a lot of sense. Just like her, they were preborn, and have thousands if not millions of years worth of knowledge and memories. Anyway, Alia greets her mother after a badass scene involving Lady Jessica when she arrives, and Alia seems very all over the place to me. She's happy Jessica's back, but also she isn't, and it feels like she's dealing with conflicting opinions and emotions. A Bene Gesserit is supposed to be able to control these things, but Alia is struggling, which is unlike her character in Dune Messiah. The reason for Alia's weirdness and focus on her being an abomination by Jessica, Ghani, and Leto is soon revealed, though. When Paul left her in control of the regency, Alia became overwhelmed with new responsibilities and duties, and the thousands of egos or personalities that sit in her consciousness were pining to help her make decisions and offer advice. In the clamor of inner consciousnesses, none other than the Baron Harkonnen, the very man she killed as a child, came to dominate. To her, it was either a stream of yelling voices and conversations never ending in her head, preventing her from ruling, or accepting the Baron's help in silencing all the other voices, and she understandably went with the latter. Reading this, I was not immediately sad for her because I didn't know what this meant. But by allowing the Baron into her consciousness, he at first was able to influence her decisions, causing her to become sexually active with Javid, and therefore cheating on Duncan, to extract information about him and secure his loyalty. This move is immensely non-Atreides and is very Baron-like, and is the first of many decisions that show how Alia is losing control of herself, and the Baron is taking over. She has become possessed. I won't go over every move Alia does in this book because she is heavily focused on and is practically the main character along with Leto II, but she goes completely off the rails in this book, and it is tragic. She arranges for her mother to be captured by the House Corneo and also assassinated, isn't sad when she learns of Leto's death, which is such a contrast to her after the death of Chani, no longer seems to love Duncan, sets an assassin on Gurney Halleck, and so much more. It becomes increasingly shown that Alia is no longer in control, but the Baron is. And everyone, except maybe Iruland and Stilgar, who is important to the story, at least suspects this. The saddest part of these is Duncan Idaho's realization. Alia meets with Duncan to convince him to help her abduct Jessica. Duncan sees Alia as this masculine-like figure, gloating and loveless, cruel, calculating, completely different from the Alia he once knew. And yet he still loves her, cares about her. It's hard when she hasn't aged since the day of her possession, due to the ability of the Bene Gesserit to control their own biology, enzymes, and chemistry. His mentat abilities frustrate him. He can't help to analyze her and to make logical conclusions. To me, he seems as if he's wishing to be ignorant to her possession, but it's just too obvious to ignore. As he exits the meeting, promising to abduct Lady Jessica, he said, "Goodbye, beloved," and she did not hear the finality in his voice, even kissed him lightly as he left. And all the way down through the siege-like maze of the temple corridors, Idaho brushed at his eyes. Hilaxu eyes were not immune to tears. These lines got me. It felt like a gut punch when reading them because certainly if Duncan is convinced Alia is gone, she is, and the Baron is what remains. Additionally, what's interesting in this chapter and many others is Alia's inability to recognize these changes in those around her. Someone trained in the Bene Gesserit ways, with the wisdom of a Reverend Mother, should be able to read people's intentions and feelings just by observing their body language and vocal tones. But Alia fails this time and time again, to see these changes in others and identify when she's being lied to. It's just another bit of proof that Alia is different. She also loses self and emotional control in this book, lashing out, making poor decisions, and showing her weakness publicly, once again showing a massive change from Dune and Dune Messiah. I feel like the main times where we get a glimpse of the real Alia in this book is when Duncan Idaho dies, when facing the preacher who turns out to be Paul, her brother, and when she dies. When Alia learns of Duncan's death via Stilgar, the first thing she says is, "Why do I not feel grief?" And she is forced to feign grief and anger of his death. When she enters the silence of her own room, she is angry because by dying, Duncan has completely messed up her plans. As she's stomping around the room, she accidentally steps on a belt buckle, one that had been given to Duncan by her father, the Duke Leto, and upon seeing it, she begins to sob. In this moment, she cannot deny the pain she feels over Idaho's death, and the love she once had for him, that the Alia part of her still has. And while crying, she asks herself, who is it that cries? Who is crying now? Is it the Baron, crying over the anger of a failed plan? Or Alia, crying over the death of her husband and friend? Whatever the truth is, she cannot stop the tears, and I believe it's Alia who cries in that moment, despite the lack of confirmation by the book. As for the preacher, he poses an unforeseen problem for Alia. She observes him through spy holes when he preaches, and she can't deny how he sounds like Paul, and he's blind like him too. Due to this suspicion, she can't seem to kill him, no matter how much unease he causes in her subjects and religious followers. Eventually, he does reveal himself to be Paul to Alia by calling her sister, which confirms the suspicion. To me, had the Baron Harkonnen had complete control, Paul would have been long dead, but Alia maintains some control, perhaps because Paul's voice is able to help her, and to me, this is an instance when the true Alia is glimpsed. The moment when Paul, now the preacher, is killed is when he preaches the lies and falsehoods of Alia's reign, and our priests lose control and kill him. Soon after this, Leto, Ghani, Jessica, and Farad enter the room where Alia was observing Paul's death. Taken by surprise by Leto, who she thought was dead, Alia is quickly disarmed and challenged by him. Leto gives Alia a choice, to either go through with the trial of possession to prove she's possessed and rightfully kill her, or to commit suicide. As he gives her these options, Alia is struggling with her inner lives. She's arguing with herself, almost Gollum-like, cursing Leto and asking what is going on in the same breath. She's confused and defeated. Well, the Baron is defeated. He tries manipulating Jessica by acting as Alia, but it fails. As he does so, she slowly moves towards an open window, twitching and turning as the force of Alia's consciousness uses everything she has left on this last act of bodily autonomy. The Baron pleads with her. He has a plan, he says, but her body keeps moving, and, in one jerking motion, she pulled herself over the sill and was gone. Not even a screech came from her as she fell. This is the end of Alia and of Paul. When I first read this, I felt immensely sad for Jessica, and I still do despite her role in creating these inhuman humans. Alia is the first character readers experience from conception until death, and it's undoubtedly a tragic tale, one that exemplifies the risks of being preborn and having these powers and being so alone in them. It shows that the Atreides family is anything but flawless and that Paul's prescience cannot save everyone. Alia Atreides' story is not just one of cosmic powers or political intrigue, but a profound exploration of the human condition, a cautionary tale about the perils of wielding unbridled power and the sacrifices it demands.